All right, Chava, say good morning. So I went a little bit over with Reb Tzaddik. Let's begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors, for the month of Sivan, Naftoli and Chava Tilson from Eretz Yisroel. We thank you, Reb Naftoli's Chaver, Benjamin Wohl, for introducing to the Daf. May Hashem bless us all to finish the Daf Yomi cycle and celebrate together with the Sim in Eretz Yisroel B'Karov. To thank Baruch Meir and Rena Dubin for dedicating our shiur and drashos this month for Sivan. May Hashem continue to protect our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisroel, and may all of our children remain safe and complete their year of learning with a deep connection to the land and to Hashem's Torah. To thank our week of learning sponsor, Mrs. Selma Wolf, in the schus of Refuah Shlema for her grandson, Kobi Rofberg, Yaakov Zev Ben Sivya Devora. We hope that he, together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, have a complete and enduring refuah. So also with that, let us continue. So today's daf is Nun Tes 59. And we are picking up in Eretz Hashem on Nun Ches Amud Beis 58b, and we left off Dechule Alma, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 lines up from the bottom. Last two words in line. So both say, so remember again, we left off. We're now again just to understand where we are with the avoda. We've now finished the sprinkling of blood inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. We've finished the sprinkling of the blood in the Kodesh opposite the Paroches, the curtain. And now we're doing the blood applications on the Mizbeach Hazav, the golden Mizbeach, which was the Mizbeach that was normally used for Ketores. So what we left off, so we'll say, the first part of yesterday's discussion was establishing where the Kohen Gadol was standing. So remember again, the Kohen Gadol would turn his back to the Paroches, would turn his back to the curtain, and would walk towards the Mizbeach Hazav, which was in the center. So if you could imagine for a moment, when the Kohen Gadol was walking with his back towards the Paroches, so remember, the menorah was on his right, the shulchan was on his left. See, he's walking towards the Mizbeach, which is pretty much like center, pretty much in the center of the Beis HaMikdash itself. And he would do the blood applications standing effectively between the Mizbeach and the curtain. That's where he was, between the Mizbeach and the curtain, with his back, it sounds like at least right now, with his back towards the curtain. Now, what we're going to see, interestingly enough, is, however, when he would begin the blood applications would begin on the far side of the Mizbeach. So remember, you're going to both say, we saw in yesterday's daf, thank you to Moshe for sending out the pictures, so now everybody has the pictures also. We saw in yesterday's daf pictures 140 and 141, which was the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Haglili, essentially how the Kohen Gadol would go ahead and begin do the blood applications. So remember again, you have Rabbi Akiva, who essentially says that you are starting from the southeast corner, and working your way clockwise around. And then you had Rabbi Yossi Haglili, who said that you are starting from the northeast corner and making your way around counterclockwise. Good. So now the Gemara says as follows. Dechuli Alma, this is very interesting. Dechuli Alma, mi'abahu karen de paga b'reisha lo ave. Now I will say this is very interesting. Both according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili and Rabbi Akiva, you are not starting the blood applications with the first corner. In other words, when the Kohen Gadol is walking from the Paroches to the Mizbeach Hazav, there he is not starting the blood application with the first corner of the Mizbeach he encounters. Because obviously, if you look back at that image, it is clear the first corner that he encounters when coming back from the Paroches, from the curtain, is the southeast corner, or the southwest corner, excuse me. That's the first corner he really encounters walking back. Yet, interestingly enough, everyone is agreeing you're not starting from the southwest corner. So what's the pshat? So the Gemara says, "My time, Amr Shmuel, the Amr Kra, the Yatsa Elam Mizbeach." Because also, once again, this is what we mentioned yesterday. Because the pasuk says the Kohen will go out to the Mizbeach. So the way the Gemara understands this is Adinofik Mikule Mizbeach. That will say, interestingly enough, the blood application begins outside of the Mizbeach. Now, what does it mean outside of the Mizbeach? The furthest corner of the Mizbeach, the furthest corner as measured from the curtain, right? Because remember again, the Kohen Gadol is coming from the Parochas, from the curtain, he's going to the Mizbeach. The pasuk says v'yatsa ala mizbech. He goes out to the mizbech. It obviously can't be literal. He's not going out. Why is he not going out? Because the mizbeach is inside. This is not the outer mizbeach. It's not the copper mizbeach for animal sacrifice. This is the golden mizbeach. So therefore, the yatsa, the Gemara understands essentially is he goes out to the farthest corner. In other words, he doesn't start with the corner closest to him. Instead, he goes out to the farthest corner. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva, nakif derech yamin. According to Rabbi Akiva, why not go ahead and start on the right side? So the Gemara, or I should say, move right, pivot right towards the Mizbeach. Perhaps Shabbos say the Nekudas HaMachlokes in Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi HaGlili perhaps is in a statement of Rami Bar Yecheskel. Damarai Bar Yecheskel, supposed to listen to this interesting case, or an interesting statement. Yam Sha'asa Shlomo. So we'll say what we call the Yam Shel Shlomo. We'll say the Yam Shel Shlomo was essentially a large pool. Now the point of this pool inside of the Beis HaMikdash was to serve as a mikvah for the Kohanim. The Yam Shel Shlomo Omed Al Shnei Masar Bakar. It was situated, if you could imagine, I don't think there was a picture of it. I don't know a picture of it. The Yam Shel Shlomo was situated on top of 12 oxen. Obviously, you know images of oxen. 12 golden oxen. The Gemara says, Shal Shnei Masar Bakar, Shlosha Ponim Tzafona, 3 of them pointed northward. Shlosha Ponim Yama, 3 of them pointed westward. Shlosha Ponim Negba, 3 of them south. Ushlosha Ponim Mizracha, 3 east. V'hayam Alehem. And ultimately, again, the Yam itself was situated on top of them. Now, I will say, the fact that the Gemara begins with a statement of that which was pointing north, which was also rightward in the Beis HaMikdash, indicates to us that right has a dominance. V'chol achareim beisa. Halamarata. What do we learn from here? Shekalpinos sha'atapona lo yu'el derech yamin lemizrach. So we'll say we learn from here that ultimately, again, any time you go in a particular direction, you should always go ahead and try to go rightward. So perhaps, again, the machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi HaGlili is halacha lamaisa. Should you go ahead and go rightward or not? Mar islay b'Rabbi Yecheskel, Umar less of Rabbi Yecheskel. Perhaps again, one opinion holds that we pass like Rabbi Bar Yecheskel, and one opinion holds that we don't. Maybe that's the Nekudas HaMachlokes Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Yossi. Lo, Ducholi Alma is Rabbi Yecheskel. Everybody agrees. I will say that in general, when choosing a direction to go in, you go right. Because we will say again, we've seen that many times before. Because the right has a chashivos. And perhaps I will say here is what Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Akiva is trying to understand. So we're just trying to understand where Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi HaGlili get their respective movements for the blood applications from. That's what's happening over here. So you just keep on referring back to pictures 140, 141, trying to understand why Rabbi Akiva is, again, starting from the southeast corner, going clockwise, and versus why Rabbi Yossi HaGlili is starting from the northeast corner, going counterclockwise. So the Gemara says maybe the machlokes is as follows. The Gemara says, Mar Sabra Yalfinan Pnei Mechutz. One opinion says that I will say essentially the blood applications on the inner mizbeach follow the same order of the blood applications on the outer mizbeach. Umar Sabra Lo Yalfinan Mechutz, and the other opinion will say no, we do not learn out the inner applications from the outer applications. I Rabbi Akiva. Shabbos say Rabbi Akiva would hold that we don't learn it out. Rabbi Yossi would say we do learn it out. But Rabbi Akiva, Nehida Lo Yalif Pnei Mechutz. But even Rabbi Akiva, if you hold that we do not learn out the blood applications of the inner mizbeach from the blood applications of the outer mizbeach, shouldn't one have the prerogative to follow that order if one so chooses? Rabbi Akiva, both listen to this. Rabbi Akiva says, I'll tell you, here's my svara. Medina, Bahu Karen de Paga Beresha, Bahu Abi Beresha. Rabbi Akiva says, really, the corner that you go ahead and you encounter first is really the corner that you should go ahead and start the blood application from. So we'll say, so remember again, in Rabbi Akiva's view, and we're going to see this is actually going to become a little bit of a machlokes, Rabbi Akiva says, where should you really begin the blood applications from? Where should you really begin? From the southwest corner. Right? Rabbi will say, why the southwest corner? Because think about this for just a moment. Where was the opening of the curtain of the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Where was the opening? On the southern side, right? On the at least for now. That, remember again, it was a machlokes we saw before. Was it on the south or was it in the north? For now, we're working with the assumption that it's on the southern side. So, which means that when the Kohen Gadol would come out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim and do the blood applications, bepashtos, he's oriented where? South. which means that when he walks to the Mizbeach, he's coming a little bit at an angle, which means that really the first corner he kind of encounters is the southwest corner of the Mizbeach. So Rabbi Akiva says, in reality, you really should start the blood applications from the southwest corner, because that's the first corner you're encountering. And remember again, the Gemara says, furthermore, the Gemara says, the Amrei Shlakish, ein ma'avirin ala mitzvahs. And also we have another principle. What's the principle? The principle is that when you encounter a mitzvah, what don't you do? Don't let opportunity pass you by. So you have to do the blood applications on the corners anyway. Start on the southwest corner, which is the first corner you encounter. The amai lo of it. So why don't we do that? Because we'll say that once again, this pasuk keeps coming up. The yatse ala mizbeach. You will go out to the mizbeach. And what do we learn from there? Adinafik mikule mizbeach. We'll say what that teaches me is the blood applications begin on the far side of the mizbeach. So in reality, I should start on the southwest corner. But because the Yatsa Mizbeach says, no, you don't start with the corner that's closest. Instead, the Yatsa Mizbeach, you go out, start with the farthest corner, so you go to the farthest corner. So the Gemara says, Adinafik Mikul Mizbeach. So we'll say, so according to Rabbi Akiva, so remember again, V'yatsa ala Mizbeach says, what should you start with? Start with the southeast corner, right? So start with the southeast corner. And Rabbi Akiva will say, once you go ahead and you start with the southeast corner, because that's V'yatsa ala Mizbeach, V'chivan diyav bahu karen, Hadar asilahi karen dechayev l'meisa bereisha. So what Rabbi Akiva's logic is, start ultimately again with the southeast corner, right? Mizrach is duromis. So start with the southeast corner, and then once you go with the southeast corner to fulfill the Yatse ala Mizbeach, then what? Then go back to the corner that you really should have started with. Right? So that's Rabbi Akiva's logic. So go ahead. You really should have started with southwest. Why should you start with southwest? Why? Because that's the first one you encounter. But if Yatse ala Mizbeach says you have to go out, which means you have to go past that which you first encounter and go further. Therefore, again, I'll go Duromis, Mizrach is southeast, but after I do southeast, then I go back to the one that I first encountered. Bless you. That's Rabbi Akiva's logic. Bless you. Top of the has Rabbosai. The other possibility is that the Machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Gamli and Rabbi Yosei Lili is Viva Isema Isvira Lan Hakafa Beregel Ducholi Amalo Pligi Diafina Pnei Mechutz. So Rabbosai, listen to this. Perhaps, well, let me just read more live. What are they arguing about? Mar Savar Rabbi Akiva, Mar Savar Hakafa Biyad, or Mar Savar Hakafa Beregel. Oh, maybe the Machlokes Rabbi Yosei Lili and Rabbi Akiva is actually whether or not the Kohen Gadol is circling the Mizbeach on foot, or whether or not he's circling it, what we call biyad, which also means essentially he stands in one place and does the blood application on all the corners. So the Gemara wants to suggest now the following. If he's actually circling the Mizbeach, if he's actually circling on foot, then everyone would agree that the blood applications of the inner Mizbeach are the same order as the blood applications of the outer Mizbeach, which would be like Rabbi Yosei Lili. But perhaps the machlokes ultimately is, how are you doing the blood applications on the interior Mizbeach? Are you what we call hakafa beregel, actually walking around on foot, or hakafa biyad, standing in one place, but just doing the blood application on all four corners? So the Gemara posits that Rabbi Akiva would hold he's standing in one place and going ahead and applying the blood by hand. Umar Sabra Hakafa Beregel, Rabbi Yosei Lili would hold that Allah Chalamaisa, you are applying the blood by walking around. The Gemara says, and if you want to say, maybe everyone agrees over here that the Kohen Gadol stands in one place and applies the blood by hand. This is what they're arguing about. Mar Sabra Yafinon Yad Meregel. One opinion will say that we learn out the process. Even though the Kohen Gadol may be standing in place, we learn out the order of the blood applications, even when you're doing it quote-unquote by hand, from the same way as if you were walking around the Mizbeach. Umar Savar Lo Yalfina. And the other opinion says, no, once you're not walking around, therefore the order of the blood applications is going to be different on the interior Mizbeach than it is on the exterior Mizbeach. The Savar Rabbi Yosei Lili Hakafa Biyad, but would Rabbi Yosei Lili actually hold that you don't walk around, but instead you just apply the blood by hand. But look at the end of the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer But remember again, in our Mishnah, we read an opinion. Rabbi Eliezer says that what? The Kohen Gadol stands in place and applies all of the blood. I will say, so it sounds like it's only Rabbi Eliezer who holds that the Kohen Gadol stands in place and applies the blood, but everyone else holds that what? That he's mamish walking around, what we call hakafa beregel, walking around by foot, to which the Gemara says, Ella mechabarta kidishanin and meikara. Rather, I will say, it appears, as we said before, that the machlokes Rabbi Kiva Rabbi Yosei Lili is, as we mentioned, namely, mar savar hakafa biyad, umar savar hakafa beregel. And perhaps I will say, this is the actual machlokes Rabbi Kiva Rabbi Yosei Lili. Do you do the blood application standing in place, or do you walk around the mizbeach? And I will say, meaning what? If you would go ahead and say that you're walking around, therefore again, the blood application on the mizbeach hapnimi, the golden mizbeach, is the same as the mizbeach hachitzon. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yosef Lili. But if you hold that it's biyad, then perhaps the order of the applications is different. I'm just going through all the different havaminas, so I'll get to the conclusion. Also, another possibility. The other possibility is maybe, first, one opinion holds that the way we work our way around the inner mizbeach is just the same way that we work our way around the outer mizbeach. Umar savar kule mizbeach pinimi b'makom chada karen the mizbeach chitzon kai. But the other opinion says no, you can't compare it to both. Listen to this. The inner mizbeach, both says we're going to see the entire top of that mizbeach was 1 amma by 1 amma, which Abba said was the size of one horn, what we call one keren of the outer mizbeach. So the entire size of the mizbeach hapenimi was the size of one horn, one corner of the mizbeach hachitzon. So the machlokes could be, one opinion says, we treat both mizbechos the same. And the second opinion says, you can't treat them the same, because again, remember, the one corner of the mizbeach hachitzon was the size of the mizbeach hapenimi. To which the Gemara says, Tanya Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel supposed to say, this is quite fascinating. Shnei kohanim gedolim nishtayro b'mikdash rishon. Rabbi Shmuel says there were 2 kohanim gedolim who remained from the time of the first temple era. And Rabbi will say, I don't know, somebody asked me this just the other week. Maybe Michael asked this, I don't remember who it was saying that you have some of these discussions occurring not so long after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So how does no one remember what happened? How does one remember what happened? So we'll say, I'm not answering the question, I'm amplifying the question now, because we'll say, watch this. So you have Rabbi Shmuel who says, Shnei kohanim gedolim nishtay b'mikdash. There were 2 kohanim gedolim who were still living after the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. They were still living. Ze omer biyadi hikafti, ze omer baragli hikafti. And I will say, listen to this. These 2 kohanim gedolim, one said, oh yeah, when I did the avoda on the inner mizbeach, I stood in place and just did the blood application moving my arm. Hakafa biyad. And the other Kohen Gadol said, oh no, I walked around. So I'll say, isn't this absolutely incredible? Zen no Saint Tamlin Devarov, and each of them gave their reasoning. Zen no Saint Tamlin Devarov, Savdim Zech Penimiki, Savdim Zech Achitzon. So the Kohen Gadol who did Hakafa Beregel walked around. He said that the inner Mizbeach is treated just like the outer Mizbeach, and ultimately again, therefore we walk around. Zen no Saint Tamlin Devarov, carrying the chitzon kai. And the other opinion said, no, you don't walk around. Come on. The entire interior mizbeach is the size of one horn, one corner of the outer mizbeach. There's no need to walk around. You could just move your hand down. So we'll say, it's incredible. This is the edus of 2 kohanim gedolim. So we'll say, what it sounds like is, it is possible. Remember again, this is reflecting a time before the codification of halacha. See, I both say we are used to approaching halacha in a very simple way. What's the bottom line, right? What is it? What does the Shulchan Aruch say? What does the Mishnah Berurah say, right? What is the bottom line? Well, remember that's because we're living far along the halachic process. But Bismane Gemara, ultimately, before Bismane Gemara, obviously, you had machloksim. So what it sounds like is, this is incredible. Going back to the beginning of the Masechta, remember again, what did the Kohen Gadol do during the 7 days before Yom Kippur? What was he doing? He was sequestered to Lishkas Parhedrin. And what was he taught? he was taught the avoda. What it sounds like is that, if it was Talmidim of Rabbi Yossi Aglili who were teaching him, they may have taught him one way, and Rabbi Yossi Aglili was later on, right? But if it was Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva who were teaching him, might have learned it a different way. That it sounds like it's possible that historically, depending on maybe who the Sanhedrin was, or depending on ultimately, again, who the Talmidei Chachamim were, might have been nuanced differences. Again, in the big stuff is the big stuff, right? Essentially, the Avodah of Yom Kippur is the Araisa. So remember again, the clear facts are the clear facts. But on some of these more nuanced machloksim, it sounds like from the Gemara that there may have been different things done by different Kohanim Gedolim. Again, I want to point out, in very few and nuanced situations like this one, hakafa biyad, hakafa beregel, seems to be that there may have been differences of approach. It's absolutely incredible. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, so what Rabbi Eliezer says, Kohen Gadol would not walk around. Instead, Kohen Gadol would stand in place and do the blood applications like that. Masnisin money. So I'll say whose opinion is reflected in our Mishnah. Rabbi Hudahi, the son of Meir Omer, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, b'mkomo omer umachta. Va'akulan hayanose. So let's listen to this. So now Rabbi Meir says, name Rabbi Eliezer, that the Kohen Gadol would stand in place. He would not walk around the Mizbeach. Instead, he would just stand in place. Umachta, and he would apply the blood on the corners. Va'akulan hayanose mimala lemata. And on all of the corners, he would dab the blood in a downward fashion, right from top to bottom of the horn. Chutz me'osa sheba lachson, with the exception of the horn that was diagonally opposite him. Shenose mimata lamala. On that horn, he would go ahead and go from the bottom up. So he would go in an upward motion. I will say the idea is anytime he's going in an upward motion, the goal is to what? To avoid dirtying his clothing. So there's a little bit of machlokus about which corner posed, the greatest danger to dirtying his clothing, but that was the idea. Rabbi Huda Omer, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, B'mkoma Omer. Rabbi Huda says that Rabbi Eliezer used to say the Kohen Gadol would stand in place, umachta, and he would go ahead and do the blood application standing in place. V'akulan, who knows saying milamata lamala, and in general the blood application, he argues, he said it wouldn't take place from going from top bottom, but rather it would take place out in an upward motion, going from the bottom up. Chutz mizu shahai salafan of mamish, with the exception of the corner directly in front of him. Sheno saying mimala lemata. For that corner, he would go ahead and go from top to bottom. Again, in order to avoid kiechi delonistavin ma'ane, in order not to go ahead and dirty his clothing. So I will say, so we have a number of machlokisim going on over here. Machlokis number one, which is the primary machlokis, well, three machlokisim. Number one, which corner is the Kohen Gadol starting from? That's machlokis number one. Machlokis number two is he standing in place or is he walking around? Hakafa biyad or hakafa beregel? And machlokis number three, interesting, is does he do most of the corners from top to bottom and only one of them from bottom up? Or does he go bottom up and one of them only from top to bottom? So three machloksim over here. We'll say Baruch Hashem, right? Mimoshe lemoshe lo kam kimoshe. The Rambam is going to be here to help us through all of this in Eretz Hashem, but let's first do the avoda. So he goes on, he says, Hiza mimeno al tarosh mizbeach. So remember again, after this, so after the blood application, so remember again, we still don't know which direction the Kohen Gadol is going in, right? We still don't know hakafa biyat, hakafa beregel, and we're still not sure when is it from top to bottom or bottom to top. But now again, let's go back. After he finishes the blood applications, he sprinkles the blood on tiharo shel mizbeach. That's the lashon of the Mishnah. Tiharo shel mizbeach. So Gemara says, "Man tiharo? What is tiharo of the mizbeach?" Amar Rabba bar Rav Shila, palgei the mizbeach. It means that he goes ahead and applies additional blood on the wall of the mizbeach. The wall of the mizbeach, some way halfway up. Kida amri inshi tahar tihara v'havi palgei Yoma. It's bright outside, and half of the day has passed. So the Gemara posits that tihara means halfway. Halfway. So after he goes in and applies the blood on four corners, he then applies it again halfway on the wall of the Mizbeach. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, Kishu Mazeh, Eno Mazeh Lo Agabe Efer. The Gemara says, really, is that so? But look at this brayso. When the Kohen Gadol applies the blood, right? In this case, when he's sprinkling the blood on the Mizbeach. So let's remember again, on the corners, that's not hazah, that's not sprinkling. What is that? That's nisina. That's an application. On the rest of the, now what the Gemara is describing is a hazah, a sprinkling. So the Gemara says, when he sprinkles, Eino mazeh lo agabe ha'efer. He doesn't sprinkle on top of the ashes on the Mizbeach. Well, so remember again, why are there ashes on the Mizbeach hazav? From what? From the Ketores. Good, from the Ketores. So he doesn't do the blood application, he doesn't do the sprinkling on top of the ashes. Nor does he do it on top of the coals. Ella chote gechalim elech. That was the first white line. Rather, what he does is he moves the coals a little bit here, a little bit here. Umazeh, and he goes ahead and he sprinkles on the mizbeach. So both say. So what does this show? Where is the sprinkling of the dam being done? Right on the top, not on the sides, not on the wall. Ella Amar Rabba Bar Rav Shila al Giluya de mizbeach. Rav Shila says you're right. The hazar said the sprinkling of the dam is done on the top of the mizbeach. The top of the mizbeach. Kedichsev uke'esem hashamayim latohar. So we'll say what tihara means is the top of the mizbeach itself. So we'll say, so again, so therefore after you do the blood application on the four corners, the Kohen now does a hazah. He does a sprinkling of blood on the top of the mizbeach. But into that, and the Brisa says, he doesn't do it on top of the coals or on top of the ashes. Rather, what he does is he kind of parts the coals a little bit and does the azah there. So the Gemara says, Tanya, Chananya, or B'tzad Sefoni, who knows saying, Chananya said that he would apply the blood on the northern side of the mizbeach. Rabbi Yossi, or B'tzad Dromi, who knows saying, Rabbi Yossi says, no, he would apply it on the southern side of the mizbeach. But my kameflagi. So what are they arguing about? This is incredible. This is what we learned before. Mar savar piska b'dara, mar savar piska b'tzafon. Both say what they were arguing about was which side was the opening, right? Which side was the opening ultimately again of the Kodesh or the Kodesh HaKadoshim. One opinion says it was in the north. One opinion says it was in the south. To which the Gemara says, "D'choli alma miha heichad degamrin matanos dekranos hasim yohiv al gago." Now what's interesting about this is as follows. Everyone is agreeing that pretty much whichever corner you finished with, that's the part of the top of the mizbeach that you're going to do the hazah. My timer, what's the reason for that? Amrikra v'tiara v'kiddusho. Because the Rebbe said there's a juxtaposition. V'tiara v'kiddusho, makom shekidsho, wherever you finish the sanctification, which is a reference ultimately again to the blood applications on the corners, sham tiharo. That ultimately, again, is where you do the tara, which is a reference to the sprinkling of the blood. Incredible. Shabbos says, therefore, again, one more machlokes. Exactly, now we know again that the hazah is, after you do the corners, the hazah is being done on the top of the mizbeach, but a machlokes, ultimately, again, which part of the top? Is it being done on the northern side? Is it being done on the southern side? And Meretz Hashem to be seen. So we'll say, remember again, now we'll say at this point in time, the entire blood service of Yom Kippur has been finished. So Bosi suggests you understand. We've applied the blood in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. We've applied the blood in the Kodesh opposite the Paroches, opposite the curtain. We've now come to the Golden Mizbeach, applied the blood on the corners, applied the blood on top, and now we are finished with the blood service. So what do you do now? The leftover blood, and you would pour it out on the western yisod of the outer mizbeach. So let's remember again, the yisod literally means the base, but the base had a drainage hole. The base had a drainage hole. You would pour the leftover blood into that drainage hole. Because the pasuk says, the rest of the dam of the par you shall pour out. V'chinafik bahu pagaresha. They both say, now why are you pouring it out on the western side, on the yisod of the western side? Because they both say, when you walked out of the Kodesh, that was the first part of the Mizbeach that you encountered. So essentially you pour out the remaining blood on the first part, the first drainage area that you encounter. And I will say again, for the outer Mizbeach, so this is talking about now blood service on the outer Mizbeach. When you finished with the blood service on the outer Mizbeach, again, not Yom Kippur, just a regular day, you would pour it out by the southern base. So Tan Rabbanan Yisod HaMizbeach Ze Yisod Dromis. When the pasuk says you shall pour it out by the base of the Mizbeach, that refers to the southern base. Ata Omer Yisod Dromis or Ela Eino Ela Yisod Ma'aravis. How do you know it's a southern base? Maybe it's the western base. So the Gemara says Amrit Yilmad Yiridasa Min HaKavesh the Yitziasa Min HaHeichal. We learn out the process of the Kohen Gadol's descent from the ramp of the altar to how he exits the Heichal on Yom Kippur. So the Gemara says, "Ma yitzi'asa min ha'heichal b'samach lo," just like when the Kohen Gadol comes out of the Kodesh on Yom Kippur with the remaining blood of the dam and the sayur, he pours it out at the closest yisod, which for him is the western one. Ve'eza ze yisod ma'aravi. So too on a regular day, when he descends from the ramp of the Mizbeach and has the remaining blood that he has to pour out, he pours it out in the closest Yesod. And which one is that? Yesod Romi. That's the southern Yesod. So the Gemara says, Tanya, Rabbi Yishmael Omer Yesod Ma'arav. Rabbi Yishmael holds that no, both on a regular day and Yom Kippur, everything is always poured out by the western base, by the western base. So also remember again, by Yom Kippur, that's fine because that's the closest one. On a regular weekday, when he's descending from the ramp, it means he has to walk a little bit. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Zev Yisod Dromi. Rashbi says no, everything is always poured out by where? By the southern base. Bishlam Rabbi Shmuel Kasavar. Rabbi Shmuel makes sense because what happens? Yilmod Sasmi Mefurash. So here's what's interesting. The Torah tells that we know more explicitly by Yom Kippur that he pours out the dam. So the Gemara will say that. So according to Rabbi Shmuel, we'll learn out the sasum, right? The sasum ultimately again is how you deal with leftover blood from the outer mizbeach. So that's not explicitly told to us. We'll learn out how you deal with the blood from the outer mizbeach from how you deal with the blood of the inner mizbeach. Ella, or from Yom Kippur. Ella, Rabbi Shimon Yochai, my time. But what's Rashi's logic? Why would he say that everything is always poured out by the Yisod Dromi? My time. Ravashi Kasavar, Pischa B'daram Koi. So we'll say this is actually very interesting. So the Gemara suggests that according to Rabbi Shimon Yochai, actually the Mizbeach was situated a little bit differently. Literally translated, Pischa B'daram Koi. If you take a look at Rashi for just a moment, Rashi says, Kasavra Pischa, it's the last short line in Rashi, Pischa Deheichal B'dromo Shal Mizbeach. He holds that the Mizbeach was actually moved over a bit more towards the north, which means that when you walked out of the Heichal, the first part of the Mizbeach you encountered was the southern side of the Mizbeach. Hilchach Yisoda Shar Pesach Or Moed Hainu Dromi. So we'll say, so interesting enough, it turns out that there may be a little bit of a machlokus over here about how the Mizbeach itself was situated. And Rashbi held the Mizbeach was actually moved a little bit further towards the north, so that when you walked out, you actually first encountered the southern corner of the Mizbeach. So that was actually the closest yisod to dispose of the blood. So the Gemara says, Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael, Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael b'd Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Zev v'zeh yisod Roma. Supposed to listen to this. In the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, they went ahead and they quoted Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, who said both bloods are poured out by the Yisod Romi v'simanach mashchua gavri legavra. And ultimately, again, they claim that the students of Rabbi Shimon ultimately went ahead and convinced the students of Rabbi Shmuel to go ahead and follow their way. So we'll say, so again, so now one more piece. So which Yisod was used on Yom Kippur? We're not worried so much about weekday right now. So it appears that everyone is pretty much agreeing that halacha l'maisa, that for at least Yom Kippur, they would go ahead and use the Yisod Dromis, the southern Yisod. Again, but we'll see in the Rambam which drain or which Yisod, which base they would pour it out on. Good. So keep that another open issue. We know that the Kohen is disposing of the remnants of the blood by pouring it down the Yisod, or by pouring it by. Now you don't pour it down the Yisod. The Yisod is the base. In the Yisod was a cavity that you would pour the blood into. Was it the southern Yisod? Was it the western Yisod? In Eretz Yisroel, we will see in the Rambam as well. Last piece of Osai, Elu ve'elu misarvin ba'ama v'yotzin. And I will say, now remember again, where would that cavity that was in the Yisod take the blood? It was essentially a channel. And where would the channel go to? The Kidron Valley. Now remember again, the Mishnah said, and what would happen in the Kidron Valley? What would happen? So remember, at that point in time, the farmers would go ahead and purchase the blood from the Beis HaMikdash and use it as fertilizer. But you had to purchase it. Why did you have to purchase it? Because if not, what happens? me'ilah, right? Which tells us that the blood itself is still subject to me'ilah until you purchase it. Once you purchase it, then again the sanctity of the blood is transferred onto the money, which becomes the property of the Beis HaMikdash. And again, halacha l'maisa, the blood itself becomes chulin. So it says the Gemara Tan Rabban Mo'alin B'dan Rabbi Meir, right? The Rabbi Meir holds that blood is subject to me'ilah. Rabbi Shimon, I'm sorry, did Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon. The Chum say no, ain't Mo'alin B'han. There is no me'ilah by dam. So the Gemara says no me'ilah by dam. So we'll say. So it sounds like over here that there is a machlokes. Is blood subject to me'ilah or not? Is blood subject to me'ilah or not? Sa'at kan lo pligi elam d'rabbanan. So also the Gemara says, first of all, let's understand. This is not a da'araisa machlokes. This is only a d'rabbanan. In other words, the opinion who says that blood is subject to me'ilah, that is a statement midrabbanan. Aval mid'araisa ain't mo'alin b'hem. Rabbi say mid'araisa, there is no me'ilah by dam. Right? Mid'araisa, no me'ilah by dam. So the Gemara says, okay, how do you know that there's no d'oraisa me'ilah by dam? But say again, I want to be clear. What the Gemara is talking about over here is even before you purchase the dam, meaning obviously after the farmers purchase the dam, there's no me'ilah, right? That's obvious. But the Gemara suggests that even before you purchase the dam, so even before you redeem the dam, everyone is agreeing that mid'oraisa, there is no me'ilah by dam. It's only midrabbanan that there's me'ilah. So we'll say, so we make the farmers purchase the dam, not because biblically they have to, because biblically there is no problem of me'ilah. It's just in order to avoid me'ilah midrabbanan, we make them go ahead and purchase the dam. So how do you know that there is no me'ilah midoraisa? So listen to this. Minahani mili, amar ula amar kra, lochem, shalachemi. Because we'll say the pasuk says, ki nefesh habasar b'damhi, v'ani nasativ lochem, I've given the blood to you. So we learn from that, Shalachem Yehei, that the blood is yours. What does it mean the blood is yours? That blood is not subject to me'ilah. Blood is not subject to me'ilah. I'll say a unique aspect of dam, that even though everything else sacrificial and consecrated is subject to me'ilah, blood is not subject to me'ilah mid'araisa. The Bei Rabbi Shimon Tana lechaper. The pasuk says that blood is lechaper, lekapar nasativ v'lo leme'ilah. I've only gone ahead and assigned blood for kapara purposes, but blood is not subject to me'ilah. Rabbi Yochanan Amar. Rabbi Yochanan says, the pasuk says, who? So I'll say the pasuk, again quoting the same pasuk, ki adam hu banefesh yichaper, who lifnei kapara kila achar kapara. Blood before atonement has the same status of blood after atonement. Mala achar kapara ein bo me'ilah. Just like after atonement, there is no me'ilah by dam. So too again, before atonement, blood is also not subject to me'ilah. Why don't you say just the opposite? Why don't you say that blood after kapara is just like blood before kapara? Just like before kapara, there's a din of me'ilah. So too after kapara, there is me'ilah as well. But see, that doesn't make sense, and I'll tell you why it says the Gemara. So we'll say this is now fascinating. We'll say there is no such thing as something which has been used for its prescribed mitzvah that is subject to me'ilah. In other words, we'll say, which is really quite fascinating. Once an item has fulfilled its consecrated purpose, it is no longer subject to me'ilah. That's the klal that the Gemara is espousing over here. Therefore, the drasha is who, that blood remains in its state. Blood remains lifnei kapara kila achar kapara. That just like blood after kapara is not subject to me'ilah, so too again blood before kapara is not subject to me'ilah. So we'll say the beauty of this Gemara, before we go on, the beauty of this Gemara is that halacha l'maisa, everyone is agreeing that what? That mid'oraisa, dam is not subject to me'ilah. Now, a machlokes as to where I'm learning that out from. But everyone agreeing with the biblical principle that blood is not subject to me'ilah. Midrabbanan, it is subject to me'ilah. Therefore, again, when the farmers get it pouring out into the Kidron Valley, the farmers must what? They must what? They must purchase it from the Beis HaMikdash in order to remove it from its rabbinic me'ilah status. Okay, so I will say now, the Gemara introduced the principle. And the principle is that once something has been used for its intended, consecrated, or sacrificial purpose, it is no longer subject to me'ilah. To which the Gemara says, really? Is that true? V'hari Trumas Hadashan. We'll say, what about Trumas Hadashan? What's Trumas Hadashan? We'll say, what's Trumas Hadashan? It's the ash. The ash from what? From what? From Karbanos. And we'll say, is Trumas Hadashan subject to me'ilah? And the answer is, yes. Now, 1 second. Trumas Hadashan Rabosai is the ash of Karbanos that have already served their purpose. So if they've already served their purpose, then halacha l'maisa again, why would it be subject to me? Lavari Trumas Hadashan. We'll say top of Samech. We'll say, come on, admit it. When it was 6:32 and we did not turn to Amud Beis, you were like, there's no way this guy's going to pull this off. Okay. I got this. We'll say top of Samech. Says the Gemara, what about Trumas Hadashan? Top of Samech, which is tomorrow's daf. Top of Samech. Mishum David Trumas Hadashan Big Day Kahuna Shnei Ksuvin Habayin Kechad. Arbo said this is it's really fascinating. I must say in general, this is what's so exciting about the daf is like you begin in one direction, you end up somewhere totally different, and on the way you acquire these incredible morsels of magnificent knowledge. So let's listen to this. Because Trumas Hadashan and Big Day Kahuna both say are Shnei Ksuvin Habayin Ke'echad. So let's talk about these two things. So the Gemara says, we'll say the concept of Shnei Ksuvin Habayin Ke'echad is as follows. When the Torah wants to teach me a rule, what does it do? It states it how many times? 1 time. Or that's what it should do. If you want to teach me a rule, right? We'll say a rule means this is a principle that applies. A rule doesn't have to apply in every situation, but a rule applies in what? The overwhelming majority of situations. When the Torah Kedosha wants to teach me a rule, say it once. If the Torah, however, states something twice, what does that tell me? That tells me that's an exception. It's not a rule. Or it should say it's an exception that applies in the mentioned cases. So we'll say, so now watch this. So the Gemara says, you want to tell me that halacha l'maisa, even something that's been used for its intended purpose, is still subject to me'ilah. And what's your proof to that? Your proof to that is Trumas Hadashan, because the ash is still subject to me'ilah, even though already the karbanos have been burned. But there's another example. What's the other example of that? This is incredible. Big Day Kahuna of Yom Kippur. Now we'll say, look at Rashi in just a moment. Tap Rashi and Samech Hamad Aleph. Big Day Kahuna. Arba'a Big Day Lavan. The Kohen Gadol Yom Kippurim. The Chsibu v'nicham sham. We'll say this is incredible. We'll say we're going to see that by the Big Day Kahuna of the Kohen Gadol, what do you do with that clothing after Yom Kippur? So it's going to be Machlokas, which we're going to touch on tomorrow. So we'll say the opinion that's being quoted over here says V'nicham sham. After the Kohen Gadol finishes the avoda, he leaves his clothing there. The Gemara is assuming right now V'nicham sham means that clothing is unusable. No one else could use it, and it is subject to me'ilah. Then Rabbi said, now watch this. What is that an example of? So the Kohen has now done the avodah of Yom Kippur. So he's used the clothing for their intended purpose. And now the pasuk is telling me what? V'nicham sham, that's what? They're subject to me'ilah. So, now I have 2 examples. I have Trumas Hadashan and Big Day Kahuna, which are 2 examples of things used for their prescribed purpose, yet still subject to me'ilah. So if you just want to say it once by Trumas Hadashan, then you can create an overarching principle. You want to just say it once by Big Day Kahuna, right? Then you create an overarching principle. You give me 2 examples of an item used for service and still subject to me'ilah. That's called Shnei Ksuvin Habayin Ke'echad. That's the Torah stating a rule twice, which tells you that what Shnei Ksuvin Habayin Ke'echad, v'chol Shnei Ksuvin Habayin Ke'echad ein melandin. And Abba said the general rule is when the Torah states a principle twice, that's not to create a rule. That's to tell you that it's an exception in these 2 mentioned cases. So we'll have to stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Eretz Hashem with this discussion of Shnei Ksuvin Habayin Ke'echad, and ultimately loop back in Eretz Hashem to Dam as well. Shkoyach.